Also, the building had to be completed in only 8 months' time. One of the biggest buildings in the world, you've got to build it cheaply and fast. Well, the committee had no way to do it until there was a submission, a design that was submitted by this person named Joseph Paxton. Well, Paxton, who was Paxton? Very few people knew him because Paxton was a gardener. He planted trees and flowers and bushes in the buildings of his master, the gardens of Kew, for a nobleman. And Paxton was good at this. He was good at growing flowers and trees and bushes, and he also started to design greenhouses. They needed to design greenhouses because they had special plants. As England moved into colonies in Africa and other places, they found new plants. They brought them back to England. But you can't grow a tropical plant in England. So, Paxton had to design greenhouses to grow tropical plants. And Paxton was not an educated man. I don't think he went to high school, but he was smart. He was very practical. And he began to design greenhouses. To design greenhouses, he used cast iron. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And glass. People were just then beginning to make big pieces of glass that you could use for building. And being a practical person, he invented ways to make these buildings quickly. This shows you the people building one of these greenhouses. They have the frame for this greenhouse. It's also like a little railroad track. Railroads were being built in Britain, and people could move along these to build the building quickly. Now, what is this cast iron construction we're talking about? Well, this was the magic material of the 19th century. It was not a new material. It had been used in Tang Dynasty China. People used it to make small things like pots. They also used it to make buildings. Not the structure of a building, but to make pieces of a building. Because cast iron is very versatile. Now, to make buildings, it began with bridges in England in 1777. Because you can take cast iron, you can make many little pieces, and you can put them together into a bridge like this. Now, this bridge is light. It's very, and it has many small pieces here that go together, so you can build it quickly. Now, in addition to bridges, they also began to make buildings out of cast iron. Because England, in the Industrial Revolution, needed a lot of factories, a lot of mills. They wanted them quickly. They wanted them fast, and they needed a lot of open space. So they began to use cast iron for the structure, for the columns and the beams, as well as for the machines that were in these factories. But cast iron had not been used for a complete, really big building until the Crystal Palace. This is the exhibit. This is what Joseph Paxton designed. It wasn't an engineering drawing. It was just a little pencil drawing on an envelope. But he had an estimate. He knew how much it would cost, how long it would take, and he was the only person who could do it. And indeed, he did do it. From the beginning, when the committee accepted him to its completion, it took 9 months. And it was long. 560 meters long. That's almost, from the front gate of Taida to the library, is about 500 meters. Can you imagine a building that takes in that whole middle space of Taida? That was what this building was. It was also 140 meters high. That's about as high as this building is here. And the building, they could take it apart when they were done with it. What you see here is not the original Crystal Palace. This is the Crystal Palace after they took it apart. They moved it to another place outside of the center of the city, and they put it together again. And they made some changes in it too. They added some things at the end there to make it look nicer. So this was really a remarkable building. It was something that began a trend in construction and engineering that lasted for at least another century. Now, the exhibition was opened by Queen Victoria in 1851. It was incredibly popular. People say that almost 1/3 of all the people in England went to see this exhibit. It also made a lot of money, because when people went in, they had to pay an entrance fee to see this wonderful thing, this biggest, greatest building in the world. It was built, there were trees, it was a park, and they had some trees on the site. They didn't want to cut the trees down, they just built the building over the trees. But the real thing that people wanted to see was new technology, things like flush toilets. You know, a toilet that has water in it. Pretty remarkable, isn't it? Well, in the 19th century in England, this was remarkable. And you had to pay money to use it. And people, it was actually not a little money, it was not cheap. And people used it because it was the first time they'd seen something like this. They had the first modern elevator. It was a safety elevator that wouldn't fall down if the machinery broke. It was invented by, anybody know who invented the elevator? An American. But the first time he showed it was in England, in this Crystal Palace exhibit of 1851. Well, what happened to Paxton after this? Well, Paxton didn't, after this, he was famous. He didn't have to be a gardener anymore. He didn't have to go back to planting flowers and bushes. He became something like an architect. Have you heard of the Rothschilds? Yeah, these are the richest family in all of Europe. Family of bankers and merchants. They wanted big houses. Why did they go to Paxton to design them? I don't know. All he'd done is this big industrial building. And these are houses that Paxton designed in, this one's in England, that one's in France. These are, I think, they're very big, they're very expensive, and I think Paxton did a better job at designing greenhouses than these. They're not really very elegant. But in any case, Paxton had moved from being a common person, digging gardens, to being somebody who could build the world's biggest exhibition building, to being somebody who could design mansions, chateaux, for the Rothschilds. Now, let's look at what did France do in response? France had seen England do this wonderful exhibit. They had other exhibits that followed in 1855, 1861. This was while Napoleon III was on the throne. These exhibits were influential, especially the one in 1867. Before the Franco-Prussian War. After the Franco-Prussian War, they had another exhibit in 1881, but these were not really worldwide things. They needed an exhibit that was going to be greater than England's exhibit. So they planned an exhibit which was called the Exposition Universelle, a universal exposition. And it was going to be in 1889. France had by this time become strong. It had its colonies, it had its industries. It wanted to show not just England, but the whole world how great it was. So, this is what's called the Fourth Republic. They wanted to show France's industrialization. It wasn't just an agricultural country anymore. It had powerful industries that actually were the equal of England's. It had colonies. They weren't as the equal of England's, but it had colonies. They wanted to show how France had recovered from its defeat in this Franco-Prussian War. And they wanted to show that actually French industries could excel, they could be better than Britain's. So, they wanted a symbol, they wanted an icon. People had been talking about designing a tower that was 300 meters tall for a long time. People had been talking about it in England, actually, first of all. But they hadn't figured out how to do it. The French, when they began planning this exposition, they started planning this exhibit a long time in advance. The English started only a few months or a year before their exhibit. The French had started several years ahead of time. One engineer, Gustave Eiffel, made them a proposition. Now, who was Eiffel? Well, Eiffel had studied engineering, not like Paxton. He'd gone to school. Now, he didn't go to the best engineering school in all of France because he came from a simple family. You look at his name, Gustave, that's a German name. He came from the east part of France. Eiffel is the town where he came from. But his family had an industrial background, and he went to an industrial school and studied engineering. Calculations. And after he graduated, he began to design things like bridges and train stations. Then, because he was successful, he established his own design and construction company. So he wouldn't just design buildings, he would get a contract for a building, and he had people who worked for him in his office. It's like an architecture or an engineering firm today. They have the person in charge of the engineering firm, and the person in charge of the firm is an engineer, but he has many people who actually do the work. Now, Eiffel was doing buildings in many areas other than France. For example, here, Budapest, in Hungary. This is a train station. And you can see here that Eiffel is using this cast iron construction here, just the way it was used in the Crystal Palace by Paxton. Actually, this is what's called a wrought iron. It's a little bit stronger than cast iron, but it's basically cast in place. This is the inside. It looks like a factory. It's very big, it's very open, it's easy to bring trains in and out of, and this is the outside. Now, let's notice something about this outside. You see in the middle, this is the structure. But when Eiffel designs this, he thinks, well, this looks like a factory. We can't put a factory in the middle of Budapest. It's the symbol of the town. We have to make it look pretty. So we'll design these little pieces of wedding cake next to it, these heavy stone buildings next to it. And this will make this thing in the middle that's just a factory look acceptable to a city. He also designed bridges. This is the Garabit Viaduct. It's in France, in the mountains of eastern France. There's a very deep gorge, a very deep valley with a river in it. And the railroad had to cross over it so it didn't have to go around this. This was the highest bridge in the world when Eiffel designed it. It's a beautiful structure. Light, elegant, nothing is wasted here. It's also very efficient. It was economical. Trains still use it. Trains still go across this 130 years later. He also did the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty, now there's another icon, right? If there's one icon of France, it's the Eiffel Tower. If there's one icon of America, it's what? Statue of Liberty. Right? Okay, America, liberty, freedom, the Statue of Liberty. But actually, Eiffel, you could say, designed two of the world's greatest icons. Now, when you look at the Statue of Liberty, you don't see Eiffel's design. You see the design of a sculptor named Bertoldi, who was a French sculptor with an Italian name. But if you go inside the Eiffel Tower, you see Eiffel's design. He designed the structure that holds the Eiffel Tower up.